This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. So some of you are still listening. You have made it this far, eh? Since you haven't left, we will use this one to summarize what is the underlying foundation of the authoritarian, a primarily minority group throughout the freest parts of the world that have had a very specific thing they build their lies upon, while even more importantly summarizing what is the underlying foundation of the larger pro-democracy coalition. The reason for these listeners leaving is surely due to us bringing up in each episode of this series thus far, and for very specific reasons, the two things you're not supposed to bring up in polite conversation: politics and religion. So let's define each of these now, no big deal. Politics can be said to be a part of ethics which consists in the regulation and government of a nation or state, for the preservance of its safety, peace, and prosperity, comprehending the defense of its existence and rights against foreign control or conquest, the augmentation of its strength and resources, and the protections of its citizens in their rights, with the preservation and improvement of their morals. At this point, it's of extreme importance to also define what religion is. And believe it or not, we were surprised to find out how sufficient the usually C+2B- accurate Wikipedia definition is. Religion is a range of social cultural systems, including designated behaviors and practices, morals, beliefs, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that generally relate humanity to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. Different religions may or may not contain various elements ranging from the divine sacredness, faith, and a supernatural being or beings. More simple definitions of each could be that politics is the science of government, while religion is any system of faith, worship, or practice. The founders of our country, the United States of America, were wise to put freedom of religion and freedom of speech in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And as a reminder, it states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Both founders James Madison and Thomas Jefferson expanded upon these words. In a 1789 discussion in the House of Representatives regarding the initial draft of the First Amendment, Madison stated the critical importance of a total separation of church from the state, which strongly guarded the separation between religion and government in the Constitution of the United States, and declared a practical distinction between religion and civil government is essential for the purity of both, and as guaranteed by the Constitution, and continued in saying, "We are teaching the world the great truth that governments do better without kings and nobles than with them. The merit will be doubled by the other lesson that religion flourishes in greater purity without than with the aid of government." In an 1802 publication and corresponding letter, Jefferson wrote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man, meaning both female and male, and his God, that he owes account to none other than for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only but not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislation should make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise of, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." So both of these gentlemen, just like the majority of the founders, just like the majority of the world's pro-democracy coalition, just like ourselves, advocate for religious freedom due to the free will of the individual, mind, heart, and will. What you think, what you feel, and what you do. And this separation allows for freedom to choose. How democratic, the freedom to choose what you want to do. So as long as you are not incurring injury or loss on another, which means freedom of religion as well as freedom from religion, of no faiths and practices and all faiths and practices, all being available if one so chooses. Religious freedom means one can practice what they want, even worship Moloch, Baphomet, and the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And you can change your mind as much as you like without the undue influence of any government or any rich and or powerful entity. Religious freedom does not mean freedom of those who call themselves religious to have it their way or the highway. Nor does it mean one can use their religion as a cudgel to create outgroups, because that would only include some of the people and not all of the people. It is instead catered to everyone's free will of choice and is synonymous with an enlightened individual with a conscious mind to have freedom of mind. Religious freedom founders such as Madison and Jefferson saw it as a way to prevent their future government from enforcing a specific religious doctrine, including freedom from corrupt and totalitarian control. Now, because we can say religion is any system of faith, worship, or practice, and the world has billions of people, you are inevitably going to get some good and some bad under that very broad definition. Or better to classify this under true religion versus false religion, or what we could call religion for light or religion for shadow. And this is where many times someone on the spiritual path will completely decouple religion from spirituality. Although this is a whole separate essay, if not series of essays, if not a whole book to expand on later, but for Cliff Notes at this point for this purpose, and for the word religion being used in the First Amendment to the Constitution, we'll keep any spiritual practice, even outside the world's formal organized religions, still somewhere in the gray area of being a religious practice in the broad definition stated prior, regardless of size or level of organization. Not quite knowing what shamanism was, an anthropologist once asked an indigenous person in the Amazon basin about his religion, and the man simply said, "Drink this ayahuasca with us in ceremony tonight, and you'll experience my religion." And in that sense, we say that is an accurate use of the word. Just like this indigenous man's religion, which is based in nature, all true, deeper religion will be based in nature and its external and internal natural processes. Will spread love of the divine along with love for fellow men of all races and economic classes, especially the poor and the natives. Will not be dogmatic and will be concerned with the spiritual development of the individual, so at its most esoteric and occult core will have a real initiation lineage. This is what we advocate for, and this is why this is actually a pro-true religion series. However, there is another type of religion out there which is imperial and false, and a constant threat to democracy. False religion replaces nature's natural external and internal processes with an external hierarchy of male-only deities and authorities, which is the off-balance patriarchy, promotes a prosperity gospel of enriching the already wealthy and not doing anything for the poor, says people are bad and born in sin, still has this manifest destiny attitude which claims God created nature to extract, hence it's imperial and colonialist, is exclusionary and divisive, and has zero interest in spiritual self-development of the individual, but instead simply installs dogmatic doctrine. This false religion, or big religion, is a type of dark shadow religion of the empire that has led to thousands of years of colonialism and imperial conquest of the indigenous peoples. Because we all need teachers in our lives to help us learn things, just like the martial arts, there is no way one is going to advance spiritually without good spiritual teachers. And it's important to build networks and make connections along the way. One cannot only go it alone. So, unfortunately, one of the largest traps for those on the spiritual path is getting involved in cults, which are extremely hierarchical groups led by a single authority bad leader or hierarchy of bad authority leaders who require unwavering devotion to a set of beliefs and practices that result in the loss of their members' free will via what's called undue influence. That influence comes from both those authority leaders as well as other cult followers. Now, there are many types of cults, such as multi-level marketing cults, or yoga and or crystal and or UFO woo cults, or organized religious cults. And a major trapfall is to think that cults are only small and medium-sized, when in reality, false religions are big cults comprised of millions of members that simply began as smaller-sized cults and grew larger for decades or centuries based on the teachings or doctrines of certain leaders. But the primary trait they all share is an excessive devotion by their members. So the more extreme one's devotion is to a group, doctrine, and or ideology, the more closed the mind, and likely the owner of that mind, is in a cult. Not a cult, as in hidden, but cult, C-U-L-T, which all share the commonality of being something that you are a member of or subscribe to, and that you cannot leave without pain. This is the foundation of every anti-democratic authoritarian in our country and throughout the world, which all the rest of their behavior radiates out from. An extreme devotion to their dark religious cult, which they are usually indoctrinated into from birth, and then is doubled down and tripled down and quadrupled down upon through the cult members' lives, which then affect their politics. This is the problem with false churches across America that spread an incorrect reading of dominion from the Bible by engaging in dominionism, which is a skewed ideology that religious people, and by religious people they don't really mean all religious people, but only mean their fellow cult members, who are supposedly called by God to exercise dominion over everything by taking control of religious and political institutions. So those within said cult who think anyone outside of the cult is sinful or evil will say things such as, "This is a Christian nation," which not only throws out all other faiths, it shows they don't actually want the religious freedom in the Constitution, let alone a multiracial democracy. They do not want multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy, let alone full-spectrum spirituality, but instead a theocracy. Christian dominionists and Christian nationalists are secretly just Christian supremacists that all want to create a false narrative about the history and founding of the United States, which has an ironclad and unbreakable separation of church and state, to instead do the opposite and merge the church with the state and send us back to medieval feudalism. They are not truly conservatives or foundationalists, they are just thirsty for a Handmaid's Tale nightmare. This is the issue with the American Christian right/Christian wrong, which is not a positive spiritual movement, it is instead primarily a political bloc. A cult using their skewed version of religion as a front. In the allegory The Cave, Plato describes a group of people who have lived chained to the wall of a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall. The people watch shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of a fire behind them, and give names and stories to these shadows. The shadows are the prisoner's reality, but are not accurate representations of the real world. The shadows represent the fragment of reality that we can normally perceive through our senses, while the objects under the sun represent the true forms of objects that we can only perceive through reason. Socrates then follows up on this by explaining how the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not actually the direct source of the images seen. One prisoner in the cave who leans philosophical aims to understand and perceive the higher levels of reality. However, the other inmates of the cave do not even desire to leave their prison, for they know no better life. So when this one prisoner in the cave moves from being unconscious to conscious enough to figure out what's going on, and climbs out of the cave to see the outside world, and takes a difficult and long acclimation period by coming out into the light, nearly blinded by it, and is eventually amazed by it, then goes back down to tell the other prisoners what he has witnessed. The returning prisoner, whose eyes have now become accustomed to the sunlight, is even more blind when he re-enters the cave, just as he was when he first was exposed to the sun. The prisoners who remained, according to the dialogue, would infer from the returning man's blindness that the journey out of the cave had harmed him and that they should not undertake a similar journey. Socrates then ultimately concludes that the prisoners, if they were able, would therefore kill anyone who attempted to ultimately drag them out of the cave. Not only are we going to be highlighting cults throughout the rest of this series, we will be getting into nested cults, meaning cults within cults in an upcoming essay. But if one knows the allegory of Plato's cave, that hits the nail on the head of what cult members' lives are like. So when someone is extremely religious and is also extremely dogmatic about it, and puts it right up front in their communications, such as mentioning it very early in conversation, or putting it on a bumper sticker, or right on their social media profile with words like Christian immediately followed by conservative, we and true religion would say they are neither truly Christian nor truly conservative, but instead in a religious authoritarian cult, which is the underlying foundation for their political authoritarian cult, and they are simply signaling to other cult members that they are on their team. because they have no individual free will or identity and instead are only given their identity through their cult allegiance. They are the opposite of individualized, but are instead collectivist. They are regressive collectivist dogmatists. Their identities are so wrapped up in their dogmas they'll do anything to prevent themselves from being unplugged, even if it means living a life of lies, because it's easy and makes them feel good to take the low road by not having to think, but instead use their hearts for hate by scapegoating others. Like Gollum being corrupted by the ring, this is what darkness does to the mind. Just like the dark cave, when your whole family and friendship circles and community are predicated around an extreme faith spread at your church or your mosque or your synagogue or your temple, if one goes through enough soul maturity to become advanced enough when growing up in an organized religious system to realize that inside a minority percentage but still sobering percentage of these places, they are being lied to because the whole thing is off-balance, dogmatic, love-lacking, patriarchal, hateful, divisive, sexually repressed, uneducated, anti-philosophical, anti-scientific indoctrination, which protects power and control and wants a king, emperor, or some kind of dictator who shares those dark values. If the individual who realizes some of these things wants to leave the cave, trying to remove oneself from such a system is so incredibly painful because those in such a group would have to give up everything, be outcast, and start all over again from scratch. So a cult member will do anything to not want to go through that, even lie, cheat, steal, or vote against their own interests because the ends justify the means. And when the most extreme degree excessive devotion is tested, which is usually put under the title of faith, air quotes, when their faith is tested, one can end up in a Branch Davidian situation where you're literally willing to let yourself and your flock and even the children within it burn alive, then admit you might be incorrect on some things. Because to admit you were wrong from a foundational level would just be too painful. So because of this pain and dogma, there is almost no use trying to convince someone to leave a cult. Most of them will be taking that shit to the grave. So this is why they say don't talk about politics or religion. Because a minority, but again still sizable percentage of the population is so indoctrinated into their religious cult and thus ultra closed-minded about not only their false religion, but their false politics, one of which predicates the other. Now it's really key for open-minded, patriotic, traveled, educated, conscious, sophisticated, nature-appreciating, science-appreciating, and philosophy-appreciating, developed people, secular and or moderately religious for light and love, or some mixture of any of these things, to realize how this false religion always tries to sink its talons into politics. And that's the reason for some of the most extreme deplorable political policies across the world which lack freedom. In Pakistan, which is majority Muslim, the punishment for denigrating or insulting or even questioning the Prophet Muhammad is death. Uganda, which is primarily Catholic, Anglican, and Pentecostal, has a kill the gays law. And Israel, which is majority Jewish, has created an open-air concentration camp for Palestinians. And this is not even to mention folks indoctrinated into the religions of empire surely want to burn us alive for sharing esoteric spiritual philosophy for you, dear listeners' self-development. And this is in 2023 at the time of this writing and not 1023. So the world's religions, especially the primary organized religions of the world, which contain light but also a lot of shadow, have a responsibility to denounce the skewing of their religious teachings away from religious freedom back towards religious freedom. We ourselves have such great respect for true people of faith, and especially those within the formal organized religious systems who call out and denounce such toxic ideologies within their own religions. But that takes guts, and we need more of it. The 2016 documentary The Jihadists Next Door highlights a small group of extreme fundamentalist Muslim morons in the UK who have become radicalized. And the most important part of the documentary is it shows all the other more moderate Muslims in the UK who are angry at the more extreme Muslims for perverting the teachings of their holy books and holy prophet. similar to how good police officers surely feel about dirty, corrupt police officers, which can give all police officers a bad name even though they in no way reflect the majority's attitudes, opinions, or behaviors. So thank you, pro-democratic people of faith who are inclusive instead of being exclusive, for helping promote religious freedom and the separation of church and state, and who have an underlying pro-democratic foundation and thus are being good cops and not bad cops. Not to mention who are then allowing, as James Madison once said, religion to flourish in greater purity. Now that we've highlighted the importance of religious freedom, we are going to head over in the next essay in this series to what an individual's free will and freedom really are.